Tomorrow is Friday the 13th, a day of mishap and misfortune. If folklore is to be believed, why are we scared of Friday the 13th? In folklore and mythology, 12 is seen as a perfect number. There are 12 apostles, there are 12 and a dozen, 12 hours on the clock, and so forth. We like 12. It's a perfect number. And 13 ruins the party. At the Last Supper, there were 13 men at the table, and we all know the 13th was the bringer of doom. Simon, he ate with his mouth open, truly dreadful. We're also not too keen on Fridays. Jesus died on a Friday, and in many European regions, executions were carried out on a Friday. And you couldn't eat meat. This, along with a bunch of other reasons, is why in the 20th century, Friday the 13th got the reputation of being a bad luck day. But of course, here in Taberna, we are not superstitious. If we were, we wouldn't be opening umbrellas indoors. Don't worry, this superstition likely started out as advice to prevent things from being knocked off shelves. In itself, not a bad practice. So today we are going to look at 13 myths and superstitions involving food and drink from around the world. Find out if we can tell how they came about and whether at the time they sort of made sense. Then we're going to grade and rank them, because this is the internet and that's apparently the law nowadays. We're still giving it our own spin, no D to S tiers here. We have lovely piece of folklore to be cherished. Then there's probably made sense at the time. A lot of superstitions are based on advice that was, in the technological and social background of the era, perfectly sound. However, time has moved on, but the belief stuck around. Next up, there is weird but harmless. These are stories that usually have more obscure origins, and we think they never made any sense. They are, however, fully benign in our opinion. Last and least is the "this is dumb and should stop being a thing" category. So without further ado, here are 13 food myths and superstitions. Mostly in no particular order, although we did save the worst for last. Let's start with a famous one. It's bad luck to put chopsticks upright in rice. You've probably heard this one before. In Northeast Asia and among diaspora from these regions, the belief exists that it is bad luck to put your chopsticks upright in your rice, or any other food for that matter, because this resembles an offering of incense for the dead, common in the local religious rites. So when you leave your chopsticks like this, you've offered your food to the dead. And once offered, it would be rude to deprive them of it. So either you play nice with them, or simply don't offer them the food to begin with. Another reason why it's considered impolite is because it is also seen as cursing your dinner partner sitting across from you to an untimely death, as they now resemble a memorial. We're not going to make any assumptions on how many people still believe this, but we do know that children are still taught not to put their chopsticks upright, if not as ghost prevention, simply as good manners. Putting your chopsticks over the bowl makes them easier to collect, and it's considered a tidier, politer way of eating. All in all, we rate this one as a lovely bit of folklore, and we're grading it 2 chopsticks up. Or flat, whatever. Next up is another famous one. You've heard stories about using garlic to repel vampires. However, the belief that garlic repels evil goes back to way before Bram Stoker and extended to more than just vampires. Vampires were believed to represent corruption. Thanks to Mr. Stoker, we now see them as sexy, suave neckbiters. But in older folklore, they were associated with rot and decay. They didn't bite the erotic neck, but went for any body part they could get to. They weren't associated with bats, but with rats. And this is still visible in some older depictions, including the silent film Nosferatu. So how does garlic keep these neck suckers away? Well, people used to believe that garlic warded off all evil. Why? Unbeknownst to people before the discovery of microbiology, the allicin in garlic is a potent antibiotic and antiseptic. We have much better antiseptics today, but people in the olden days would have noticed that wounds rubbed with garlic were less prone to infection. Hence, it's easy to see why people were convinced that garlic warded off evil. When it comes to harmful microbes, it sort of does. Because it's been co-opted by the vampire stories, we don't really see it in the folklore to be cherished category, but it definitely made sense at the time. and we are rating it 4 Bela Lugosi's. Next up is a myth we had never heard of before we started researching this video. Apparently, peanuts in the shell cause crashes at motor races. According to Snopes, the story goes that during a bunch of massive crashes in the 1930s, there were reports that crashed cars had peanut shells in them. This is likely false, as peanut shells were already considered bad luck before the crashes. One driver who really hated peanuts was Vern Orendorff, likely the originator of this superstition. There is no evidence that peanut shells had anything to do with any crashes, but today many NASCAR teams apparently still ban peanuts from their pits. It's common for people in sports to develop their own beliefs and rituals. Even more so in sports where the participants are sitting atop a bunch of combustible material going at speeds humans were never meant to reach. This does seem to be an American superstition though. We live in the country that pretty much runs Formula 1 and had never heard of it. Another NASCAR superstition is that green cars will cause lethal crashes, and that surely never crossed the Atlantic. Since this is so niche and the people this applies to genuinely have more important things to worry about, we're putting this in the weird but harmless tier. 6 out of 8 cylinders. The next one is quite a fun one. A good primary source mentioning this myth comes from Reginal Scott's Discoverie of Witchcraft. He details how witches can apparently take eggshells, craft ships out of them, and then use them to cause storms at sea. To be fair to Reginald Scott, he gives us the details of this to then say how absolutely ridiculous it is. Nevertheless, the story held sway over sailors for centuries. The nautical profession has a well-known reputation for folksy superstitions, and this one is no different. All the way until the mid-20th century, eggshells would be thoroughly crushed aboard ships. That is, if the captain allowed eggs on board in the first place. As for the underlying reason behind this myth, we're honestly stumped. Waste management is our best guess, but feel free to put your theories in the comments. Just make sure if you ever find yourself on a medieval ship to crush your eggshells. Because it's pretty dead these days and there's no downside to crushing your eggshells, we are also putting this in the weird but harmless tier, but it's flirting with silliness. Half an egg out of a full box. Next up is an important one. Putting milk in your tea before the sugar will result in loneliness. Ah yes, the old milk before sugar one. Origin, United Kingdom, of course, because apparently this is the only country where people know how it's done. Let's sort this once and for all. Here's how you make tea. It's not hard. Take the mug and put in the tea bag. Some people add water before the tea bag. That's fine. On this, you have discretion. Add boiling water. Not tepid or lukewarm. Boiling. Now, if you want sugar, add sugar. In this order. Stir. If you want milk, add milk. Serve and or drink. Ideally with a biscuit. Why is sugar before milk so important? In order for the sugar to dissolve in the beverage, you need heat. If you put in cold milk or cream, the heat goes down, reducing the sugar dissolving ability of our base beverage. So, will you be lonely if you get it wrong? Yes. Now, there are people who think they have smart comebacks by pointing out that they drink coffee and not tea. And to them we say, we drink coffee too. But variety is nice, and with exception of the tea bag, all these rules also apply to coffee. Also, we're getting to the coffee superstitions later. Now, you might say, I live in an area where the power grid is not strong enough for electric kettles. We sympathize. But alternatives are available. And the most egregious comeback. I heat it up in the microwave anyway. Get out. But before you do, it would be great if you could subscribe. Yes, we know, nobody uses the subscriptions anymore, but for creators, a subscriber increase still counts as a sort of super like, which really helps with our engagement stats. If you are already a subscriber, firstly, thank you. Secondly, would you please leave a like? It really helps us. Okay, back to superstitions. So, the wisdom goes that if you make your tea wrong, you will never marry and you'll be consigned to a life of loneliness. This was most likely devised to instill fear in people so that they would make their tea properly. And we agree. We therefore put it in its own special category and rated 20 scoops of sugar and then some milk. Now something a bit less serious. when clinking glasses, you should look each other in the eyes. The origins of this are a bit hazy, but we can make some educated guesses. The practice of clinking cups or glasses is pretty well known. The bumping of vessels full of liquid would mix the contents slightly, and therefore it would be unwise to poison your drinking partner. The mixing of drinks became a sign of mutual trust, which was then reduced to a symbolic clinking of vessels. It's easy to see how looking each other in the eye, a strong gesture of trust and truthfulness, fits into this. Having been subjected to this practice for a long time, we can say it's pretty annoying, especially when drinking with a lot of people. A new round of drinks tends to turn into an awkward game of hand-eye coordination twister. We wouldn't be surprised if pub landlords were behind the origin of this one. What makes this superstition special, however, is not the practice, but the penalty. While some say that the penalty for missing eye contact is 7 years of bad luck, the more prevalent penalty is 7 years of bad love-making. We say that bad is better than none. If you are a champion at blind glass clinking, you might want to put this down as cherished folklore, but we're pinning it under weird but mostly harmless. Score 4 years of mediocre, you know. Now for a much more fun one. In large parts of the world, especially in the Romance language speaking world, it's good luck to eat 12 grapes or raisins at the start of the new year. Each grape or raisin brings luck for 1 month. So by eating 12, you're covered for the next year. Oh, there goes May. These days, this tradition has spread all over the world, and there are local variations on what should actually be eaten. Apparently, in some places they have black-eyed peas. The origin of this one makes perfect sense. Before industrial farming, grapes and raisins were among the most precious of foodstuffs, one of the few things that were consistently sweet. So having them represent fortune in the months to come seems like a quick link for people to make. We're putting this down as lovely folklore, which should be cherished. 12 snacks of your choosing. Next up, spilling salt is bad luck. Again, a more famous one, which makes sense as for a large part of history, like grapes, salt was precious. Like a lot of animals, humans need salt to stay alive. It was often a controlled product, and soldiers were paid with it. That's where we get the word salary from. Spilling salt would be like spilling the contents of your bank account and a life-saving medicine at the same time. So yes, some would call that bad luck. Other superstitions related to salt probably have the same origin, like sprinkling salt to ward off evil spirits, which probably has its origin in the preservation qualities of salt, like we saw with garlic, and spiritually sacrificing something valuable. Other superstitions with salt mainly focus on treating it carefully, like never passing a salt shaker directly to someone else. Again, understandable if you keep the value of salt in mind. These days, salt is pretty cheap, so the superstition has faded from the forefront of our minds to internet listicles. Therefore, we are putting this one down as understandable at the time. Grade 5 shakes of salt. The Holy Cross will protect your bread from being a cushion for the devil. So, some people attribute this to Ireland in the Middle Ages, but we've actually found traces of this superstition even in the 20th century and all over Western Europe. The belief goes as follows. If you don't cut a cross in your bread before baking, the devil will sit on it. However, if you do cut a cross in your loaf, it will repel the devil and your loaf will rise up nicely. To someone who has never baked bread, this might seem weird, but to anyone who has ever made a loaf, this makes perfect sense. Allow us to demonstrate. Since this has a reputation of being a medieval myth, we're making 2 sourdough loaves. This will work with yeasted dough too. You can even use our beer yeast method if you want to be fully authentic. We're going to score one with a cross, the other one is going in without any scoring. After a quick bake, it does look like the devil sat on this one and not the other. How did this happen? The crossed loaf rose more because the scoring created a weakness in the crust, allowing the bread to rise up. The other one was kept contained by a hard crust and therefore had to expand in a more chaotic way and simply stayed denser. So it might sound silly at first, but scoring your bread, be it with a cross or any other shape, will help it rise, while omitting this will keep it flat or weird. We're rating this as made perfect sense at the time. Okay, there's a bunch of coffee superstitions out there, so here are some we cherry-picked. These will all count as one entry. If you let your son drink coffee when still a boy, he won't be able to grow a beard. Debunked. Next, bubbles in your coffee predict your financial future. If the bubbles come towards you, you'll gain some wealth. If they go away, you'll lose money. We think this is more of an indicator of how balanced your table is than a financial acumen though. Next, it's bad luck to drink coffee while standing up. Okay, this one might be onto something, but if we're being serious for a second, it's easy to see how this one came about. It's clearly folk wisdom encouraging people to use coffee as a moment to take a break, have a sit down, and enjoy your cup with others. Based on the first two, we're minded to put these in the dumb category. However, we are going to be generous and rate them purely based on the last one. A lovely bit of folklore. But now we get to the most egregious ones. Lightning storms will make dairy and soup go sour. We actually spotted this one on Reddit, where people said that their grandparents still believed this. Digging a bit deeper led us to talk to people who, when they were children, were told to rush soup to the cellar when a thunderstorm was predicted. We're not physicists, but we're not aware of electricity in the air souring anything. So how did this come about? We do know that thunderstorms are more frequent in summer, and while electricity might not sour any soups, heat certainly does. In addition, thunderstorms usually bring rain with them. And in the olden days, rain falling through a thatched roof into an open container could have introduced plenty of impurities, which can cause souring. Properly storing your food is a good thing, and back in the day, although the actual cause was misidentified in this myth, it did make sense. In a way. However, we're pretty sure there are still a few people out there overeating because they saw a storm coming on the weather forecast. Since it's pretty harmless and quasi-dead, we're tempted to put it into one of these categories. But because there are still remnants of it up and running, we're putting it here, but it's a light condemnation. 2 pots of soured yogurt. Unlike the previous myth, this one is still very much alive and kicking. The wisdom goes, beer before wine, you'll be fine. Wine before beer, you'll feel queer. Just to be clear, queer here means a bit funny. The word has changed meaning quite a bit over the decades. It essentially means that if you drink beer first, then wine, your hangover the next day will be fine. Do the reverse and you'll suffer. We still hear people adhering to this and think they'll cheat the inevitable hangover by simply building up in alcohol concentration. And as far as we know, there are local varieties of this myth all over Europe, and all of them are pure rubbish. There is no scientific evidence to show that the alcohol delivery medium has any effect on the hangover. Believe us, we've tried. And even if you don't believe us, there are studies. As to the origin of this myth, we found 2 prevailing theories. The first is that it's simply an illustration of wine being more expensive than beer. So if you found yourself drinking wine and then beer, you haven't really moved up in life. Whereas the other way around indicates you've accumulated wealth and things are going well. Another theory refers to party planning. If a party starts with wine, which has a much higher concentration of alcohol, and only cracks open the beer later, it will get pretty chaotic. Whereas the other way around would tend to keep things a bit more civilized, implying that people are already satiated before the strong stuff comes out. Whatever it may be, just remember, if you drink too much and you're not one of those annoying people who don't get hangovers, you will get pain, regardless of the order of drinking. Since so many people still believe this, we're placing it under dumb. Half a pint of tepid beer. No wine. Now we get to the last and worst of the lot. It might not be as widespread, but it compensates for that in sheer stupidity. This myth is annoyingly still very much alive and kicking, in as far as we could trace Belgium, France and the Netherlands. Luckily, it's not a strongly held belief anymore, but from time to time, someone will still bring it up as a "did you know" story, even on TV shows. The origin of this isn't clear, but it is obviously a remnant of decades, no centuries, of misogynistic beliefs and superstitions that are somehow obsessed with the perceived impurity and uncleanliness of female sanitation. We have plenty of stories of people who, when they were young girls, were not even allowed in the kitchen for 1 week per month because they would spoil things. And don't think this was limited to rural backwaters. And the superstition about mayonnaise is one of the toxic remnants of this idiocy. And now we're going to put it to bed for good. We have all the ingredients for a lovely mayonnaise right here. And now all we need is... don't worry, we found someone else. She's a bit shy and prefers not to have a face on camera. Sadly, we don't think this video will help that. Now, we could cheat and get some mechanical help, but we are confident we're going old-fashioned with a bowl and a whisk. Regarding the time of the month, you're just going to have to trust us. Take 2 egg yolks, a dollop of mustard, and start whisking while adding oil little by little. As soon as it starts to grab, add a small dash of vinegar. Then go back to adding oil. Keep doing this until you've added between 300 and 500 milliliters of oil. When almost ready, start tasting and add salt, white pepper and more vinegar to taste. Once ready, store in an airtight container. This will stay good for about a week. And there you have it. Perfectly good mayonnaise made by a woman on her period. So if anyone brings up this or another similar bit of nonsense, feel free to tell them that it is just plain dumb. Actually no, it's worse than that. Score spoiled mayo that was left out for a few days. Despite the angry landing, we hope you enjoyed this strip. Along with some folklore myths and legends, some of these should be cherished, some should be damned, and some should be strictly obeyed. Whatever may be, make sure you're safe on the 13th, you never know what might happen. Thank you very much for watching.